Hello, story seekers. We are still here with a captive Kit Whitfield, who we will only free once she has answered interview questions. So, Kit, are you prepared?
Just as long as I can go. Yes, I am.
Give her back her skin now.
If they haven't listened to the previous episode, that's going to be excellent.
I hope they haven't, just for that reason.
It's getting very damp in here.
It's getting worse. Kit, lovely Kit.
Yeah?
What is the first story you wrote which meant something to you?
Oh, I think when I was in my late teens, I wrote a story that you can find on my website, which I don't really use that much these days, which is kitwhitfield.com, called The Little Finger of the Left Hand, which was about a little boy who dips his finger in the drained life of a slaughtered pig and then gets a sort of life-giving touch on it, which goes a bit wrong. So I was, I think, 17, 18 when I wrote that, and I showed it to my dad, who is a critic so harsh that he's been known to throw books across the garden and make unforgiven remarks to people he knows who asked him what they thought. And he read it and said, you could be a proper writer. So if you don't like my books, blame him.
Wow, that's incredible. So that sounds like it might have been a bit rough as well, but it also like you did come out quite strong from that situation. I don't like.
Yeah, no, I mean he doesn't throw my books around.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, that's fair.
No, he just threw a book that my mother had given him for Christmas across the, and like not violently. I think he just like tossed it because there was nothing in the way and there was moss for it to land on. Going, this book's no good.
Excellent.
I realised I just made him sound like an object hurling maniac. No, he's actually perfectly.
I actually just sort of more meant that like to have someone with such strong opinions and good taste. You know, if you sort of know that you're going to be doing this or you want to be doing this, and did you sort of feel like that was always a checkpoint that you had to get through to be able to go forwards, or
yeah, or at least I'd shown it to my mother and she said it was very nice, very darling, but that was my mum. You know, my mum says that about everything. I think, I wanted his opinion because I wanted it to be proper good, if you see what I mean. And I knew that if he didn't think it was proper good, he would say so.
Yeah. I think that's probably very useful, actually. Like,
it's definitely useful.
When you're creative, the worst thing you could have is doting parents. Because you don't want someone to say, that's wonderful, darling. Say, no, tell me where I can improve. I need to practice. Practice is how you get good at stuff. So, if nothing else, I think you
can practice without necessarily getting harsh feedback. I mean,
one
criticizes oneself as well.
True.
So I think actually what was best for me about it was getting affirmation from somebody whose word I trusted. But I think it was the affirmation that actually worked for me. I mean, everyone's got their own process, but I mean, like I do online workshops and stuff, and I'm a big believer in creating a positive environment.
How do you balance when you're running those workshops? How do you balance people's? I'm trying to phrase this correctly, but basically, so obviously, positive affirmation, yes, but also as you said before about the way that your mum saw it, if it's just all rosy skies and everything's fine, it potentially people won't listen to the as well. So do you have a method for quickly establishing yourself and your opinion as something that is worth earning, and then also be able to give affirmations? Do you have like a particular plan for that, or is it just?
I figure if somebody's there, then they must have some faith in my opinion. But the other thing I do is that I will try to pick out something specific to praise. I don't just say, oh yes, that's very nice. I will say, oh, it's got a very good atmosphere, or that's got a really good image, or that's a very nice concept. So you know, I'll try to single out something specific so they know I was listening.
Oh, that's really cool. I think obviously we do a lot of story discussion on this podcast, so it's always really interesting to hear people that do it in other circumstances and their
And I
takes.
mean, there is obviously a place for critical feedback. It's just I am very much an improviser, not a planner. So
Yeah.
for me, the place for constructive criticism is in the second draft. The first draft is where I call it making mud pies. You know, you slap stuff together and see what sticks.
Mm. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. So I think those that listened to the previous episode got a sense of your writing and your outlooks. But just so we get it nice and high up in this episode, where would you recommend that the folks listening start reading your body of work?
Well, the two books I would most recommend are the Gaiaford series. They are the most recent and they are my favourites. They are set in the same world, about the same characters, but they can be read separately. First is called In the Heart of Hidden Things. Second is called All the Hollow of the Sky. First one's blue, second one's red. You can get them. You can order them through your local bookshop, which is a great thing to do if you can. And to support local bookshops online, then uk.bookshop.org is a good place. Or there is, of course, Amazon. And also on Audible, there's a lovely audiobook version of each read by Juanita McMahon on Audible. And I had the pleasure of meeting her before she got started. And lovely person, very good reader. She did it was wonderful talking to her because in the first book there is, among other things, a very politically minded cat, like cat politics, not human politics. It does not care for human peasantry, but it's very interested in cat court politics. I was vaguely inspired by the old legend where a man comes home and he says to the people there, "Oh, I saw the strangest thing. There was a bunch of cats walking down the road carrying a beer with a great big tabby on it, and they were all weeping. And their cat on the fireside jumps up and says, 'Then old Peter's dead and I'm king of the cats,' and dives up the chimney, never to be seen again." So, so there is a political cat in that. And she was saying to me, "So how shall I do the cat voice?" And I watched her just take her voice, move it to a different part of her throat, and out of her body came this cat voice that nearly made me fall off my chair laughing. So
Brilliant.
it's wonderful to see somebody do something like that. So yeah, I'd recommend the audiobooks as well.
So, Kit, say hypothetically that there were two writer podcasters and they were being held sort of hostage at one point by a powerful and capricious bibliomancer. And that bibliomancer was hell-bent on getting the best stories he could for his magical library. What book would you recommend for that wizard? You know, hypothetically.
A book of writing advice or a book of to be
I think
influenced
he's not too interested, at least hypothetically speaking, he's not too interested in learning about writing. He just likes stories. So
I'm more of a narrative guy.
there he is.
Well, I'm afraid they're probably going to have to die because the answer I would give is, or either that or he's going to have to befriend them, because the answer I would give is, what kind of writer are each of these two podcasters? Because there are writers that inspire different writers, and trying to be like somebody that you're not is. I'm a big believer in everybody figuring out their own individual process. The advice I always give is act like you are a naturalist observing yourself in the wild as you write. So what I'd say to him is put on his David Attenborough jacket, let them have a free run at the infinite library in the echoing chasms of his underhall.
Nice.
Observe them over his half-moon spectacles for about a month, and make them sit down and write after a morning of reading. Then take meticulous notes on what kind of reading seems to get good results out of them. And the David Attenborough voice is optional, but observing by results is what I would recommend. And he may just have to sacrifice them on the altar if doesn't like that advice. Sorry, Oz.
No, get out of the chair, Nico. It's me. Hello. You're asking me to sort of free range these two horrible little buggers.
I
A doctor.
am, sir.
Was it
They
to
are an
become
unruly species, and nothing but the most naturalistic approach is found to be efficacious in the course
She's
of
mocking you now, Eustaris. She's mocking you.
I think she was mocking Attenborough, and I've met him once. He's a wizard.
I was
Not many
going to be a
people know that.
necromancer.
No.
I thought you were doing the wizard.
No, I am. I'm not doing anyone. I'm me. I can do Attenborough. Hang on. Here we see two writers.
We're more enthused. Here are two podcaster writers in their natural environment. Now it's
Look,
just...
you tell this Kit Whitfield that if she keeps it up, she'll be in the tower as well.
You don't want to get trapped in the tower. It's really bad in
Have
the
your
tower.
fucking corned beef sandwich when you're.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
all right, I will. He's gone.
Corned beef makes him fart as well. It's horrible.
It's so pungent.
Oh, so speaking of process, Kit, what is your editing process?
Well, I will get a first draft done first. I've been introduced to the phrase exploratory draft, which I think is very helpful. And sometimes I'll stop partway through a first draft, scrap half of it, and then go back and start over. So I never really know where I'm going until I've got there. Then I go through, I prune out as much as I can. I have a dear friend I run things by. We have a weekly online little session. She's a poet and I'm a novelist, so we show each other work. And she is both a poet and a mass market fiction fan, which is a wonderful combination. So I run things by Harriet. And I like to sort of... And I tend to do the subtler shades of character development in the second draft. Second draft is where I really start enjoying myself. Then I send it to my agent, and I do what she tells me, because obedience to my agent is my principle in life. And one thing I have noticed in conversations with when I'm getting feedback is very often people can identify that there's a thing bothering them, but the suggestion for what to fix it is not quite right.
Okay.
And they may feel that, they may see that themselves if you talk about it. But if somebody says, I think that you should have, I don't know, I think that you should have your necromancer be a consumer of nothing but grapes instead of a consumer of nothing but bananas. It may be that grapes is not the solution to the problem. That may be wrong, but they may very likely be right that having him consume nothing but bananas is a problem. So you may think, well, what's the problem with bananas and why are they suggesting grapes? Well, bananas are imported and he's very much about Old English magic. So grapes is wrong because they're imported as well, although they're European rather than tropical. But if I have eat nothing but red currants, then I've got something, and then everybody's happy. I don't actually.
I like that a lot.
Bananas.
I like that a lot.
Do you have any hot tips for working through when something doesn't work for you and getting to the root of what it is that makes it not work for you, as a casual reader?
Well, what I would say as a writer is that if it's not working for you, what are you not having fun about? Think about why. I think analysing it might work for some people, but I think that if it's not working for you, it's probably because there's no joy in it. So what decision took the joy out of it for you? What is constraining you? What is making you feel not free to be silly? Because if you're not free to be silly, then you're not free to be inventive, and you're not free to come up with unexpected and dramatic stuff. So freeing yourself to goof about. I mean, if people listening to the first one, they know that I wrote a horror story, so it's not exactly comedic. But I think the process of being able to goof about is important.
Yeah.
So yeah, what about it is making it not fun for you? Then do the opposite of that.
So you did talk to us briefly about your dad and how he kind of gave you the nod and the wink and the I think you can
Hmm.
do this, off you go. But was there someone who inspired you to actually start telling your own stories?
I started in meditation workshops actually. We I was on a gap year. I was full of teenage angst and low self-esteem, so I picked up a leaflet for some meditation workshops, which actually turned out to be for a cult, but I didn't know that at the time.
Hang
Fortunately,
on, cult pause, cult pause.
Cult pause.
Good
Got to
cult,
do the
good
cult
cult,
pause.
bad cult. Is it everyone drinks the Kool-Aid cult or plant vegetables and be nice to each
no,
other?
no. Stories about the founder, shall we say, taking advantage of his position of authority over attractive young devotees.
Ah, the
Bit
common
of
garden
backdoor.
variety. That's a garden variety cult. That's
Yeah,
ubiquitous culting.
I probably
yeah.
didn't do it in the
The
garden though.
founder is deceased, and I mean, I won't name names because I don't want anybody to get sued. The founder is still around, is no longer around. The organization it was full of very nice people. I mean, these things are the way a cult works is you have an asshole at the top taking advantage of the goodwill of a lot of really great people at the bottom. So my hope is that the really great people at the bottom now just have an organization rather than a cult. But it was a cult at the time. But anyway, one of the things that that was good about it is that they had art and writing workshops as well as meditation classes, and they encouraged free writing. Like you get your hand moving, and then you just write down whatever rubbish comes into your head, even if you're just writing bananas, bananas, bananas. And that really helped me. That helped me just start freeing up my imagination. It's a very hippy dippy way of doing it, but it's what got me going. So, I mean, I was one of those little girls who had 3 books under her pillow every night, and apparently I used to walk up and down the park. My primary school didn't have a playground, so they'd take us to the park, and I'd walk up and down the paths with my best friend, narrating Greek myths to her. So,
Solid.
yeah. So
Yeah, that
I was
sounds
always like that.
We do that now.
Uh-huh.
But with sort of erotic poetry to each other, and it's it's in private. That's really interested me. The whole cult thing. So, on a completely unrelated note, what place does religion have in fantasy storytelling for you?
I would call myself an agnostic,
Mhm.
but I would say this is going to sound insufferable, but I would say if I have a spiritual practice, it's as much about writing as it is about anything else.
Sure.
Which is to
Do you
say,
put religion in your work? Do you actually put religion in your stories?
I have religious characters, yes,
Mm.
and I find religious characters fun. I like in and like the books that I wrote most recently, the Gaiaphid series. Everybody in them is religious to some extent because it's set in a pre-industrial era and it's in a rural village, and
Yeah.
so church is where you go every day. Some of the characters take religion very, very earnestly. Some people are dogmatic and doctrinal. Some people are like, well, God's kind of a superior craftsman. I don't know his trade secrets. I'm just going to do my best and hope for the best. One thing that I did find interesting was that in the first book, I made a mention in passing that there's a character in the village whose father is a Moorish immigrant. Now, I did this primarily to piss off white supremacists, because white supremacists do unfortunately batten on to folk horror and folk fantasy sometimes. And I wanted to just make absolutely clear, I am not giving aid and comfort to you guys. But then when I went on to write the second book, I realized, I've mentioned this guy, and I know that he's a close friend of the character this book is going to be about more. So I'm going to have to bring him into it a bit more. So I have a sensitivity reader, which was a very interesting experience. I asked for one. But one of the things that I found interesting to do was think, well, in this pre-industrial, certainly like pre-Windrush era, how would people relate to the fact that there is a Moorish guy and his family living in the village? And what I thought, based on the very imperfect historical knowledge I have, is that the way he looked would be less important than the fact that he was originally Muslim and that he was a convert for the sake of peace, but that people would still refer to him, if they didn't like him, as pagan, rather than referring to the fact that he's black.
Mm.
So that was an interesting one to get into.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. That sounds really good. I think. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say with.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying Muslims actually are pagan. I'm saying that's the slur.
No, we got it. Yeah.
With having a sensitivity reader, I think a lot of people think that there's just a person who turns up with a bowler hat on who is labelled sensitivity reader, and they'll go through your whole book and say, these 37 things are offensive to 37 cultures. That's not how it works, gang.
Absolutely not.
I
think they put your blue hair more than a bowler hat. But what I realised, I've heard people talk about this online, and I realised people think sensitivity reader is a full-time job. Like they picture an in-house sensitivity reader who vets every book that a publishers publish. And no, it's not. It's just a specialist editor who is a member of whatever group you are writing about, but do not belong to yourself. So the sensitivity reader, I pasted all the passages about Mr. Attic, which is his name. It's an anglicization of Atik, which is his original name. I just pasted all the bits about Mr. Attic and how people talk about them into a single document. That went off to the sensitivity reader, and for double sure, I showed it to a friend of mine who, like the major member of the Attic family in the cast, is the first generation English daughter of Muslim immigrants. And she gave me some fascinating pointers, which were not like, oh, that's offensive. It was stuff like, yeah, you're aware that this guy would not like to eat pork, but are you aware that he might also be fussy about eating vegetables that were grown in fields that pigs and dogs might have gone into? And I was like, that's really interesting. And you know what? Narratively speaking, I could do something with that. I could be like, the protagonist is a friend of the family. So maybe the fact that he scopes out these fields beforehand is a sign of the relationship that he has with the family. This stuff, I did not feel censored. I felt, I'm getting information about a culture that my knowledge is not as deep as might be on. And the more I find out about it, actually, the more ideas it gives me.
I think it's almost like a title shift to like context and sensitivity reader might help people understand better. Because I think that can only be of a benefit for someone to say, oh, you might not actually know this about the culture I'm a part of, and it could actually help your story. Conversely, if anyone's writing about goblins, Ben and I are available as goblin sensitivity readers.
Or like specialist editor, which is really all it is. I agree. Sensitivity reader is the sort of... Sensitivity is one of those words that I think most people can be normal about, but some people just get all het up when they hear the word. And
they get wrinkled in the dinkle is what happens.
They get wrinkled in the dinkle. There it is.
There we go. We found the use for the phrase.
Perfect.
And like
this episode feels complete for me just because of that.
But like there's a point where the sensitivity reader, she suggested I change a piece of phrasing because it was historically correct but wasn't liked by Muslims today. And we went back and forth on it. And that was one where, I could have made an argument because I wasn't being racist myself. I was just using an outdated word. But in the end, I thought, you know what? Is this the hill I want to die on? Yeah. There are other ways I could put this. And, if changing it avoids upsetting the Muslim who has been a wonderful enough person to buy my book, this one isn't worth a fight. So, and that's not me feeling censored. That's me just making a decision and thinking, you know what, some things are just not that important. And with editing, I go very much on the principle that if something is open to misinterpretation, then it's poorly phrased. So if somebody misunderstands what I say, then I could go, no, you haven't understood it. But that's my fault for not making it misinterpretation proof.
I think that's a good outlook.
So when you're picking up books for yourself to read, are there any themes that you are particularly drawn to?
I'm a fairly eclectic reader. I like to read across a wide range of genres. I think it's always good not to get too locked into any one particular genre, just because there's always more going on. I think for me, the big decider is style rather than theme. If I will read the first page of a book, and if it's tuned right for me, then I will go, I think I might need this book. And if it's not, then I'm like, more power to you, but this is not necessarily the one for me.
I bet in places like bookshops that can be devastating if you're hitting a lot of good first pages.
Well,
what constitutes a good first page? Just like from your perspective, like what's the kind of first page that would grab you and then force you to go to the register to pay for the book?
Well, I have to say I am mostly Kindle trash, so
sure,
my bookshelves are full. Yeah, so what draws me on a first page, I think, is mostly to do with the use of language, something that feels very present, both in terms of, I think, sensory experience and the voice and the psyche of the narrative voice. And I really like very strong, vivid use of language that doesn't tip into overwriting. So it's a very delicate balancing act, but sometimes you just pick up a book and you think, okay, I am in safe hands here.
I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's still subjective, isn't it? Because different people will have different lines for that. But I think ultimately that's what most people are looking for, isn't it? That it's right in the center of the sweet spot for you. Very good. So, do you? Obviously, we could preface all of these questions with "as a writer," but the question is, do you feel connected to a particular culture in the world, in your region, online, wherever? And if so, has it affected your writing? And how has it affected your writing?
I would say folklore is my big writing inspiration. And I like to use the folklore that I grew up around, which my father is English, my mother is Irish. So a combination of the two of those, I would say, is what generally rings along my bones.
Northern Irish or Republic?
Republic. I do believe that there is a family tale of how her, I think, great uncle was, or maybe great great uncle, was on a prison ship for Republican activity against the British government, and gave a bollocking to a guard because his son came to visit him, and the guard thought, oh, the little fellow looks a little bored, so he gave him his gun to play with. And my great great uncle, the prisoner, turned around and said, "What are you doing, giving a child a gun to play with?" There's also a story of how my grandfather wet his pants for Ireland.
Need to hear that.
Yeah,
I'm in.
Well, his father was, I think, moderately active in like the Republican movement. He was a doctor, and secret meetings took place in his clinic because it was a place people could come to without raising suspicion. And one day, English soldiers came round and asked if he was hiding any revolutionary paraphernalia. And he decided to waste their time. So he said, yes, there's a compost heap over there in the garden, and there's some stuff buried there. Here's a couple of spades. Off you go. And they dug and they dug and they dug and they dug. And my grandfather was upstairs, absolutely terrified, because these were British soldiers that his father was winding up. Hence, he wet his pants for Ireland. As they dug and they dug, and they finally turned and said, all right, what is this Republican paraphernalia that you've got in here? And he said, oh, there's a couple of old war medals buried somewhere in there if you don't dig deep enough. So
They turned out his compost heap for him. I like that. That is good stuff.
basically, yes. So
Thank you.
definitely Republic of Ireland and very Republican. My mother, bless her, she's lived in England all her adult life, and she married an English man. But she also will say somebody is very English as a way of saying she doesn't like them.
As an English person, I think I've said that before, so I think that's fine.
It's
I think
it's very English. So obviously Celtic folklore is absolutely wild and fascinating in a different way that I think a lot of British folklore is. I wouldn't go out there as something in the woods and it'll eat your toes or whatever. But that we tend to settle on that. Whereas, I mean, we went to Dublin together, Ben and I, and we went to a wax museum with an entire room that was dedicated to Celtic folklore. It was like being attacked with a neon dream. It was beautiful.
it was very good.
Do you think having that sort of double dose, but in different types of folklore, has helped you find something like kind of some new, fresh takes by smashing the two together?
Maybe. I'm probably not the best person to say. I think I'm going to say read my books and then you can tell me.
That's a bloody good answer.
They're a load of rubbish. I don't care because you read my book. Haha.
I think just on that, like, what is your next project? Is there going to be another Gearford book or?
So I have just finished another book, which is on a different subject. My agent is going to start shopping it around. I think that we've got a meeting probably next week, and we're going to discuss strategies for that. So it's still folklore-inspired fantasy, but it's on a different subject.
I like it. So, just once again for the cheap seats at the back, where should people go to keep up to date with your news? Because I tell you what, I've really enjoyed this. I think I really enjoyed telling stories with you in the first episode, and you've made me laugh a lot, and you've had some really good insight in the interview. So thank you so much. But where should people go to get more of this from you?
At Kit Whitfield on Blue Sky is probably the best place to find me. And come and have a chat. Come play with me.
Fantastic.
Just like the garden at FantasyCon, you have been absolutely fab to spend some time with Kit. It's been lovely.
Oh, you too.
So I think release Kit to the wild. Is that it, Ben?
Yeah, well, I think we'll have to release you back to the wild to encounter more folkloric stories and distill them into excellent novels. Thanks again, Kit.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?